My father pointed his steak knife directly at my chest across a table of half-eaten prime rib. He demanded I quit my job immediately to become an unpaid errand girl for my sister's wedding. When I hesitated, my future brother-in-law tossed a crumpled $100 bill straight into the grease on my dinner plate, telling me to go buy a dress so I would not embarrass his elite family. They thought they were putting the worthless youngest daughter in her place. They had absolutely no idea that the no-name company I supposedly did data entry for was actually my own tech startup, and I had just closed a funding round valuing it at $80 million. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who underestimated your worth. My name is Kiara, and I am 24 years old. Growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, in a middle-class African-American family obsessed with status, I learned very early that love was not unconditional. My parents, Marcus and Valerie, were driven by an endless hunger for prestige. My father was a bank branch manager, and my mother was a former local women's association president. To them, appearances were the only currency that mattered. They desperately wanted to claw their way into the city's elite circles to be seen dining at the right country clubs and to be invited to the most exclusive charity galas. My older sister Nia was exactly what they wanted. At 26 years old, Nia was beautiful, completely absorbed in social climbing, and possessed a ruthless determination to marry into wealth. She spent her days curating a flawless social media presence and her nights attending networking events to find the perfect husband. Her efforts paid off when she met Chad. Chad was a 30-year-old white finance guy who constantly bragged about his venture capital firm. My parents worshipped the ground Chad walked on. They thought having a wealthy, well-connected white son-in-law was their ultimate ticket to high society. They treated him like royalty, hanging on his every word, and treating his highly exaggerated financial advice like absolute gospel. And then there was me. I was the black sheep of the family, the disappointment, the invisible daughter. While Naya was busy shopping for designer bags on our parents' credit cards, I was quietly building a life they knew absolutely nothing about. They thought I was struggling through a business degree, working some dead-end data entry job just to scrape by. They constantly mocked my plain clothes, my quiet demeanor, and the long hours I spent staring at my laptop screen. My mother would introduce me to her friends with a sigh, explaining that I was still trying to find my way while proudly announcing Nia's latest social triumphs. They had absolutely no clue that the no-name company I was supposedly doing data entry for was actually my own startup. I had created an artificial intelligence platform for financial data analytics right out of my dorm room. Over the past 3 years, I had scaled the business from a simple algorithm to an enterprise software used by top financial institutions. We had just closed a funding round that valued my company at $80 million. I was a chief executive officer, a founder, and a self-made millionaire. But to Marcus and Valerie, I was just Kiara, the girl who would never measure up to perfect Nia. I kept my wealth entirely hidden. I drove a reliable used sedan, lived in an unassuming apartment, and dressed in simple, comfortable clothes. Peace was more important to me than proving them wrong, at least until their arrogance pushed me past the point of no return. The incident that set everything into motion happened during a painfully expensive family dinner at a high-end steakhouse in Buckhead. It was a Friday night, and the restaurant was packed with Atlanta's wealthy elite. The dining room was loud with the chatter of patrons, the clinking of crystal wine glasses, and the sizzle of premium cuts of meat being carried out on silver platters. The air smelled of roasted garlic, expensive cologne, and burning money. I was sitting at the edge of our large booth, wearing a simple black turtleneck, trying to make myself as invisible as possible. Across from me, Nia and Chad were holding court. Nia kept waving her left hand around so the dim chandelier light would catch the massive diamond on her engagement ring. Chad was loudly detailing the plans for their upcoming wedding, deliberately projecting his voice to make sure the tables next to us could hear exactly how much money he was dropping on the event. "We just finalized the catering and floral budgets," Chad announced, practically shouting over the ambient noise. It is running us about $150,000 total for the weekend, but honestly, Nia deserves the absolute best. My family is flying down from New York and they expect a certain level of class. We are going to deliver an experience that this city has never seen. My mother Valerie placed her hand over her heart, her eyes shining with absolute adoration. "Oh, Chad, you are spoiling her," she cooed, reaching across the table to pat his arm. "It is just so wonderful to see my daughter treated like a queen. The women at my social club are going to die of jealousy when they see the floral arrangements. You are giving her the fairy tale she always deserved." My father Marcus nodded vigorously, slicing into his prime ribeye. "That is how a real man takes care of his family," he said, raising his wineglass toward Chad. "You focus on the big picture, Chad. You keep making those brilliant moves in the market. We will handle all the tedious logistics for the wedding." I kept my eyes firmly fixed on my plate, cutting a piece of asparagus and silently calculating how many minutes I had left until it would be socially acceptable to excuse myself. I had an early morning meeting with a major banking client to negotiate a multi-million-dollar software licensing deal. Listening to Chad brag about his inflated wedding budget was exhausting, especially because I knew the venture capital market inside and out. My analytics software tracked financial anomalies, and I had quietly run Chad's firm through my database out of pure curiosity. I knew his company was a hollow shell burning through cash and desperate for fresh investors to pay off the old ones. But I kept my mouth shut. It was not my circus, and it was not my monkeys. However, my father was not about to let me sit in peace. Marcus suddenly slammed his heavy silver fork down against his porcelain plate, creating a sharp clatter that made me jump. He pointed his steak knife directly across the table, aiming the sharp tip right at my chest. "Kiara, look at me when I am talking to you," he demanded. I looked up, keeping my face completely neutral, hiding the sudden spike of adrenaline. "Yes, Dad," I replied politely. "The wedding is exactly 2 weeks away," he said, his tone shifting entirely from the jovial respect he used with Chad to the cold, authoritative bark he reserved only for me. "Your sister has a million things on her plate. She is completely overwhelmed with the venue preparations and her beauty treatments. She is stressed. So starting tomorrow morning, you are going to take time off from that little data analytics job of yours. You are going to be Nia's personal assistant until the wedding is over." I stared at him, genuinely taken aback by the sheer audacity of the demand. "Dad, I cannot take 2 weeks off from work right now. We are in the middle of a massive project rollout. My team is relying on me and I have critical meetings I cannot miss." Nia scoffed loudly, rolling her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck in the back of her head. "Oh, please, Kiara," she whined, crossing her arms. "You just sit at a desk in some cubicle and type numbers into spreadsheets all day. Anyone can do that. Literally anyone. This is my wedding. It is a $150,000 luxury event. It is slightly more important than your minimum wage data entry job. I need someone to address 500 invitations by hand, coordinate with the valet service, and steam all the bridesmaid dresses. I need you to pick up the dry cleaning, manage the mail deliveries, and run errands across the city." My mother chimed in, glaring at me as if my hesitation was a personal insult. "Your sister cannot be bothered with menial tasks right now. She needs her beauty sleep so she looks radiant for the photographs. You are her sister. It is your duty to serve her during this time." I took a deep, steadying breath, trying to keep my voice completely even. Dad, I understand that Nia is busy, and I am happy to help on the weekends. But my job is my livelihood. I cannot just abandon my responsibilities and my career to run errands across Atlanta. It is not a request I can accommodate." My father's face darkened with absolute fury. The veins in his neck bulged against his stiff white collar. He leaned entirely across the heavy oak table, completely ignoring the shocked stares from the neighboring booths. He pointed his finger directly in my face, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You are going to do exactly what I tell you to do, Kiara. You live under my rules, and you are part of this family. You will march into your boss's office tomorrow morning and demand the time off to serve your sister." I opened my mouth to calmly decline, preparing to finally walk away from the table, but before I could say a single word, Chad decided to intervene. Chad let out a loud, slimy chuckle that sent a shiver of disgust down my spine. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick designer money clip. He slowly, deliberately peeled a crisp $100 bill from the stack. He leaned over the table, holding the green bill between his index and middle finger, and dropped it right onto my dinner plate. The paper landed squarely in the remaining juices of my medium-rare steak. I watched as the grease slowly soaked into Benjamin Franklin's printed face. "Listen to your dad," Kiara Chad said, flashing a bright, incredibly patronizing smile that showed off his perfectly bleached teeth. "Take the time off. Run the errands for my beautiful bride. And take this. Go buy yourself a decent dress for the reception. My family is flying down from New York, and they represent the true elite of the financial world. I cannot have you showing up in your cheap off-the-rack clothes looking like a charity case and embarrassing me in front of my guests. Buy something nice. Consider it a generous tip for your services." The entire table went dead silent. The disrespect was so palpable, so suffocatingly heavy, that for a second I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat rushing in my ears. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away completely. I looked down at the soggy $100 bill resting on my plate, and my mind went entirely blank before crystal-clear resolve took over. I stared at the soggy $100 bill resting in the congealing meat juices on my plate. If you looked closely at my face in that exact second, focusing tightly on my features, you would not have seen a single trace of the terrified, obedient daughter they thought they had molded. My expression was perfectly still, cold, and entirely unreadable. I watched the grease slowly saturate the crisp green paper, turning Benjamin Franklin's printed face translucent against the porcelain. Around me, the smug satisfaction radiating from my family was a heavy, suffocating presence. As I sat completely motionless, the scene around me seemed to pull back, revealing the entire table staring at me like a pack of wolves cornering a wounded animal. Chad sat back in his expensive but poorly tailored jacket, looking incredibly pleased with his own performance. Nia was sipping her champagne, a victorious smirk playing on her glossed lips as she waited for me to break down to cry, to beg for their approval just like I used to when I was a helpless teenager. But I did not cry, and my absolute lack of tears seemed to infuriate my father even more. He expected immediate submission, and my silence was driving him to the edge of his patience. He leaned forward again, his face turning an unhealthy shade of purple under the dim chandelier light. He slammed his heavy fist onto the solid oak table, making the fine silver rattle loudly and causing the patrons at the neighboring booths to glance over in alarm. "Listen to me very carefully, Kiara," he hissed, his voice dropping into a menacing register that used to make my blood run cold. "You think you can just sit there and ignore my direct orders? You think your little data entry job makes you an independent adult? Let me remind you exactly who pays for your life and who holds your future in their hands. If you do not march into your boss's office tomorrow morning, quit your miserable job, and dedicate every waking second to serving your sister for this wedding, I will cut you off completely. I will cancel your college tuition for your senior year right now tonight. I will call the bursar's office tomorrow morning and pull every single cent of my funding. You will be a college dropout serving coffee for the rest of your pathetic life. Do you understand me? You are nothing without my checkbook." Before I could even process the absolute absurdity of his threat, my mother Valerie decided to twist the knife. She placed a manicured hand gracefully against her pearl necklace and looked at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Do not be so incredibly selfish and short-sighted, Kiara." She scolded, her tone dripping with condescension. "You need to learn your place in this family hierarchy. Look at Chad. Chad is a real provider. He is currently helping your father invest our retirement funds, and his brilliant venture capital firm is generating tens of thousands of dollars in returns for us every single month. He is elevating our family status, ensuring we finally have a seat at the most exclusive tables in Atlanta. The women at the Buckhead Country Club are already green with envy over this union. And what do? You sit in a drab cubicle and type numbers into a machine. You should be honored that Chad is generous enough to give you a handout so you do not look like a complete beggar in front of his wealthy New York relatives." Show some gratitude for once in your miserable life. Nia chimed in, tossing her perfectly styled extensions over her shoulder. Honestly, Mom, I do not even know why we try with her, she sighed dramatically, acting like the benevolent queen dealing with a peasant. I am giving her the opportunity to be part of the most talked about social event of the season. She gets to pick up my custom dry cleaning, organize the seating charts for the elite guests, and manage the temperamental florist we flew in from Paris. It is the absolute closest she will ever get to high society. If she wants to throw away her college degree just to keep her minimum wage job, let her ruin her own life. But she is not ruining my perfect wedding weekend. They looked so incredibly certain of their victory. They thought threatening my education was the ultimate trump card, the perfect, inescapable leverage to force me into submission. They were practically vibrating with the thrill of putting the worthless youngest daughter in her proper place. Slowly, deliberately, I reached out and picked up the greasy $100 bill from my plate. I held it between my thumb and index finger, letting a drop of seasoned steak juice fall back onto the porcelain. I pulled a crisp white linen napkin from my lap and calmly, methodically wiped the grease off the money. I smoothed out the wet creases, folded the bill perfectly in half, and slipped it into the small pocket of my black slacks. The entire table watched my every movement in dead silence, waiting for the inevitable breakdown, waiting for me to apologize, and beg my father not to ruin my future. I looked up, meeting my father's furious, expectant gaze, and allowed a faint, perfectly polite smile to touch my lips. "Okay, Dad," I said, my voice completely smooth and devoid of any underlying emotion. "I understand perfectly. I will do exactly what you want. I will take the time off and dedicate myself to Nia's wedding." The tension at the table instantly evaporated, replaced by a suffocating wave of smug triumph. My father let out a harsh breath, leaning back in his chair and adjusting his stiff collar with a satisfied grunt, fully believing he had successfully crushed my rebellious spirit. My mother gave a curt nod of approval, her posture relaxing, and Chad whispered something crude in Nia's ear that made her giggle maliciously while glancing in my direction. They immediately went back to cutting their expensive steaks and loudly discussing their lavish plans, completely oblivious to the reality of the situation they had just created. As I sat there quietly slicing a piece of cold asparagus, a notification vibrated against my leg from the secure phone hidden in my pocket. I did not need to look at the screen to know exactly what the alert meant. It was an encrypted banking notification confirming that a $5 million dividend from my company's latest enterprise software licensing deal had just cleared directly into my personal offshore account. $5 million in pure profit quietly deposited, while my future brother-in-law threw a crumpled $100 bill at my face like I was a charity case. What my father did not know as he sat there proudly threatening to pull my college tuition was that I did not need a single dime of his money. I had never actually needed his money. He did not know that I had already graduated as the valedictorian of my university's Advanced Business and Computer Science program 6 entire months ago. I had paid for every single credit hour myself, using the initial seed funding from my startup, and I had simply skipped the graduation ceremony because I was busy closing a massive funding round in Silicon Valley. He thought he was holding my future hostage, completely unaware that my future was already secured, deeply funded, and scaling on a global level. And my mother, so proudly bragging about Chad's brilliant financial advice, had absolutely no idea that the prestigious venture capital firm Chad worked for was currently under federal investigation for massive financial fraud. My artificial intelligence software, the very platform my company had built, was designed to track high-risk financial anomalies, and I had run Chad's portfolio through my system out of pure curiosity. I knew his firm was a hollow shell, a sophisticated Ponzi scheme burning through cash, and desperate for fresh investors to pay off the old ones. Chad was not making my parents rich. He was systematically funneling their hard-earned retirement funds into a sinking ship to cover his own massive corporate debts. They were practically handing their entire life savings over to a con artist, all while looking down their noses at a self-made millionaire daughter. I chewed my food silently, letting their arrogant, boastful chatter wash over me without reacting. I had agreed to be Nia's personal assistant for the next 2 weeks, but I had absolutely no intention of picking up dry cleaning or folding custom napkins. I was going to use my unrestricted access to their wedding planning, their elite guest lists, and their fragile financial arrangements to orchestrate the most spectacular, devastating downfall Atlanta high society had ever witnessed. They wanted me to serve them. They wanted me to be present for every single moment of their grand, superficial celebration. And I would be. I would be right there in the front row holding the detonator, ready to blow their fake, pretentious lives to absolute pieces. The morning sun reflected brilliantly off the polished glass of the downtown Atlanta skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across the bustling pavement. From a high vantage point, looking down at the street level, a sleek black custom-armored SUV pulled smoothly to a halt in front of a towering corporate skyscraper. The rear door opened, and I stepped out. I was no longer wearing the invisible, shrinking girl persona from the steakhouse. I was dressed in a tailored charcoal blazer and sharp stiletto heels, my posture radiating absolute authority. The chauffeur gave a respectful nod as I walked past. I strode through the revolving glass doors and into the expansive marble-floored lobby of my company headquarters. Security guards straightened up and greeted me by name. Employees hurried past, offering polite smiles and morning pleasantries. I stepped into the private executive elevator, scanned my biometric ID, and pressed the button for the top floor. The penthouse suite was a sanctuary of quiet power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city my family so desperately wanted to rule, completely unaware that I already owned a significant piece of it. My desk, a massive slab of polished obsidian, sat at the center of the room. Dual monitors glowed with real-time financial data, algorithmic patterns, and the proprietary software that had made me a multimillionaire. I sank into my leather executive chair, took a sip of my black coffee, and prepared to review the morning market reports. Just as I brought up the global revenue tracker, my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently across the smooth surface of the desk. The caller ID flashed a name that instantly brought a bitter taste to my mouth. Valerie, my mother. I let it ring 3 times, taking a slow, measured breath to recalibrate my mindset. I had to instantly transition from the ruthless CEO back into the pathetic, obedient youngest daughter they believed me to be. I tapped the screen and answered, keeping my voice soft and slightly hesitant. "Hello, Mom," I said. "Kiara." "Thank goodness you answered," Valerie snapped. Her voice was breathless, tight, with an undercurrent of panic that she was trying very hard to disguise as mere annoyance. "Listen to me. We have an absolute emergency on our hands, and I need you to handle it right this second. No questions asked." I leaned back in my chair, swiveling slightly to look out over the city. "What is wrong, Mom? Is Nia okay?" "Nia is on the verge of a complete nervous breakdown," Valerie hissed dramatically. "The lead floral designer we contracted from Paris is threatening to cancel the entire contract. He claims the wire transfer Chad initiated for the final deposit did not clear, and now he is refusing to load the custom orchids onto the freight plane. He needs $10,000 processed immediately, or the entire aesthetic of the reception is ruined." I raised an eyebrow, a cold smile touching my lips. $10,000, I asked, feigning shock. "Why did Chad's wire not clear? I thought he just finalized that massive catering budget last night." Valerie let out an exasperated sigh, treating me like I was a slow child who could not grasp basic economics. "Chad is a high-level venture capitalist, Kiara. You would not understand how these things work. His cash flow is temporarily tied up in a highly lucrative multi-million-dollar overseas project. The funds are perfectly safe, but they are in a holding pattern for the next 48 hours due to international banking regulations. He cannot liquidate assets right now without taking a massive tax penalty. It is just a minor logistical hiccup." A minor logistical hiccup. I almost laughed out loud. My software had already shown me exactly what Chad's international holdings looked like. Zero. He had zero liquidity. The money from his fresh investors was already gone, funneled into covering past debts and funding this lavish, fake lifestyle to impress my status-obsessed parents. But I kept my tone perfectly naive. "So what do you need me to do?" I asked. "I need you to use your credit card," Valerie demanded. "That student credit card your father co-signed for you. I know you have a $10,000 limit on it for emergencies. You are going to call the florist right now, give him the card number, and authorize the charge. Chad will reimburse you next week when his funds are released." I stared at the financial dashboard on my screen. "Mom, I cannot put $10,000 on a student card. That will completely max it out. What if I have an actual emergency? What if I need to pay for my textbooks next semester?" Her voice turned instantly vicious, shedding any pretense of maternal affection. "Do not start being selfish, Kiara. Do not ruin this. If you do not make this payment right now, Nia's wedding will be a disaster. She will be humiliated in front of Chad's elite family, and your father will be absolutely furious. You saw how angry he was last night. Do you really want me to call him and tell him you are refusing to help your sister over a simple temporary loan? He will cut off your tuition today. He will throw your belongings out onto the street. You will do this, Kiara. You owe this family for putting up with your lack of ambition." The sheer manipulation was staggering. She was willing to force her youngest daughter into massive high-interest credit card debt just to maintain a fake image of wealth for a man who was actively scamming them. They truly believed I was a disposable asset, a human shield to absorb their financial shocks. They thought they could bully me into financial ruin just so Nia could have imported orchids at her reception. I took another slow sip of my coffee, feeling the absolute certainty of my plan crystallizing in my mind. "Okay, Mom," I said, my voice trembling perfectly to simulate fear and submission. "I will do it. I will pay the florist right now. Please do not tell Dad. I will take care of it." "See that you do," she snapped, her tone instantly returning to a haughty purr. "I am texting you the florist's payment portal link right now. Send me the confirmation receipt the second it is done. Do not mess this up, Kiara." She hung up the phone without another word. I lowered the device and let the silence of my beautiful, expansive office wash over me. I opened the text message Valerie had just sent, clicking the link to the high-end Parisian floral boutique. They wanted $10,000 immediately. I turned to my primary monitor and opened my personal, highly secured banking portal. The screen displayed a balance that would have caused my mother to faint on the spot. I did not reach for the battered student credit card in my wallet. Instead, I initiated a direct, untraceable wire transfer from one of my corporate shell accounts straight to the florist's receiving bank. But I did not just send the money. I used a specialized legal software interface my firm had developed for rapid contract deployment. I routed the $10,000 through a micro-lending entity that I completely controlled. I attached a digital legally binding promissory note to the transaction, directly linking the debt to Chad's personal holding company, utilizing the very tax identification number I had pulled from his fraudulent financial records weeks ago. Because the funds were being used directly to secure a vendor for an event legally registered under Chad's name, the transaction bound him as the ultimate guarantor of the funds. In the memo section of the wire transfer, I typed out a single precise line of text. "Short-term emergency floral loan. Subject to 25% compounding weekly interest. Default guarantees immediate asset seizure." I hit execute. The $10,000 vanished from my screen in a fraction of a second, an amount of money so insignificant to me that I generated more than that while drinking my morning coffee. But to them, this transaction was a lifeline. To me, it was a beautifully crafted noose. By accepting the payment on behalf of his event, Chad had legally bound his failing company to my micro-lending firm. When his inevitable default occurred, I would have the absolute legal right to seize whatever remaining assets he possessed, exposing his fraud to the entire world and legally stripping him of the fake wealth he used to patronize me. I took a screenshot of the basic payment confirmation, carefully cropping out my banking details and the attached loan clauses, and sent it to my mother. Within seconds, she replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji. No thank you, no gratitude, just a digital dismissal. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my obsidian desk, and smiled a cold, calculating smile. They thought they had forced the family failure into crushing debt. They thought they had bullied the weak, obedient daughter into saving their precious social standing. They had absolutely no idea that I had just purchased the first undeniable piece of their destruction, and I had done it all before 9 o'clock in the morning. The trap was officially set, the bait was taken, and now all I had to do was watch them gleefully tighten the rope around their own necks. The smooth mechanical whir of the camera dolly tracked in a slow, continuous circle around my massive obsidian desk. The lens captured the stark contrast of my two worlds colliding in real time. On one side of the heavy glass doors, the bustling, sterile efficiency of my company headquarters hummed with the energy of a global tech empire. Inside my private boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with high-stakes tension. 7 of the most ruthless, brilliant minds in the venture capital sector sat around my conference table, their eyes fixed entirely on me. We were in the final stages of negotiating a hostile takeover of a major data analytics firm, a deal worth upwards of $2 billion. My chief legal counsel was in the middle of breaking down the target company's fragile compliance structures, explaining exactly how we were going to dismantle their executive board by Friday. I sat perfectly still, listening to the tactical breakdown, my hands steepled beneath my chin. The room was a masterclass in focused power. Then a sharp, jarring vibration shattered the absolute silence of the room. My personal cell phone, resting face down next to a stack of highly classified financial dossiers, began to buzz aggressively against the polished stone. The screen illuminated, projecting a harsh glare. The caller ID boldly displayed the name Chad. My chief financial officer paused mid-sentence, a frown wrinkling his forehead at the unprecedented interruption. I did not apologize. I simply raised a single manicured index finger, demanding absolute silence from the billionaires sitting in my presence. The room instantly froze. The heavy hitters of Silicon Valley held their collective breath, waiting for my cue. I picked up the device, taking a brief calculating second to completely erase the ruthless CEO from my posture. I softened my shoulders, pitched my voice an octave higher, and answered the call with the meek, subservient tone my family had come to expect. "Hello, Chad," I said, keeping my words perfectly polite. "Listen to me, kid," Chad barked into the receiver. His voice was unnecessarily loud, carrying that distinctive, arrogant brassiness of a man who loved the sound of his own ego. He did not bother with a greeting. He spoke to me exactly the way he would speak to a valet who had parked his rented sports car too slowly. "I need you to drop whatever pointless little campus project you are working on right now. I have a mission-critical task for you, and I need it done yesterday." I held the phone slightly away from my ear, allowing the crisp, high-definition audio to drift faintly across my silent boardroom. My executives exchanged bewildered glances, completely unaccustomed to hearing anyone speak to me with such blatant, casual disrespect. "What do you need, Chad?" I asked, my voice the picture of obedience. "My custom tuxedo," he declared, snapping his fingers at someone on his end of the line. "The tailor down in Midtown just called. It is finally ready. It is a bespoke Italian cut, cost more than your entire car, so do not let it touch the ground. I need you to go down there, pick it up, and bring it directly to the country club. And do not take the bus. Take an Uber Black and ask your mother to reimburse you. I cannot have my wedding suit smelling like public transit." I glanced at my chief technology officer, who was currently staring at me with a mixture of horror and profound confusion. I offered him a slow, chilling wink before responding to the man who was actively scamming my parents. "I can pick up the suit, Chad," I said sweetly. "Are you and Nia busy with the wedding planners today?" "Busy does not even begin to cover it," Chad scoffed, letting out a loud, self-important laugh. "I am currently standing on the balcony of a $12 million piece of prime real estate in Buckhead. We are doing the final walkthrough before I wire the cash offer." I went completely rigid, my eyes locking onto the live data streams crawling across my secondary monitor. A $12 million cash offer. My mind rapidly referenced the financial algorithms my software had generated regarding his firm's liquidity. He did not have $12 million in clean cash. He did not even have 12,000. If he was preparing to wire that kind of money for a personal residential property, he was not just shuffling corporate debts anymore. He was actively committing massive, undeniable wire fraud, likely draining the last remaining drops of his clients' escrow accounts, including my parents' entire retirement portfolio. He was buying a mansion with stolen money, completely convinced he was untouchable. $12 million, I repeated, ensuring my voice sounded sufficiently awestruck for his ego. That is incredible, Chad. Nia must be so thrilled. Oh, she is losing her mind. He bragged, the smugness radiating through the speaker. It has an infinity pool, a wine cellar, the works. I am buying it outright as a wedding gift for her. This is what real success looks like, Kiara. You should take notes. In fact, if you manage not to completely ruin this tuxedo pickup, and if you actually manage to finish your little college degree without failing out, remind me to look at your resume. I might have an opening at my fund. It is just a low-level data entry clerk position, mostly fetching coffee and sorting mail, but it would be good experience for you. You need to learn how real money operates. It is the absolute least I can do for my future sister-in-law. The sheer, unadulterated delusion of his offer hung in the air of my boardroom. He was offering me a minimum wage pity job at a fraudulent venture capital firm that my own artificial intelligence was currently flagging for federal investigation. He was lecturing a self-made tech billionaire about how real money operates. I let a few seconds of silence pass, allowing his arrogance to fully marinate. My chief legal counsel, a man who charged $2,000 an hour, was pressing his lips together tightly, his face turning red from the absolute absurdity of the conversation. "That is so generous of you, Chad," I finally said, my voice completely smooth, betraying absolutely none of the lethal calculations processing in my brain. "I will focus on graduating first, but I really appreciate the offer. I will head to the tailor right now and get your suit." "See that you do," he commanded sharply. "And Kiara, tell the tailor to put the final alterations bill on my tab. I am a VIP client there. They know I am good for it." He ended the call abruptly, leaving the dial tone echoing in my ear. I lowered the phone and placed it gently back onto the cool surface of my desk. The suffocating silence returned to the boardroom, heavy and thick with anticipation. 7 powerful executives stared at me, waiting to see how the CEO would react to being treated like a disposable intern. I picked up a sleek digital stylus and spun it slowly between my fingers. The submissive, obedient sister was instantly gone, replaced by a cold, calculating predator. I looked directly at my chief technology officer. "Pull the real-time financial surveillance protocols we have on Chad's firm." I ordered, my voice dropping back into its natural, commanding cadence. "He just claimed he is wiring a $12 million cash offer for a property in Buckhead. I want to know exactly which escrow account that money is bleeding from. Trace the digital footprint of the wire transfer the second it initiates. If he is routing stolen client funds through residential real estate, he is triggering automatic federal money laundering alerts." My CTO nodded sharply, immediately pulling out his encrypted laptop and aggressively typing lines of code to deploy our tracking software. "You want me to flag it for the Securities and Exchange Commission immediately?" he asked, his eyes glued to the scrolling data. "Not yet," I replied, a dark, dangerous smile spreading across my face. "Let him sign the closing documents. Let him legally bind himself to the federal crime. We are not just going to report him. We are going to let him build the entire explosive device himself, and then we are going to detonate it when the maximum amount of people are watching." I turned to my legal counsel, who was already taking frantic notes. "Prepare a comprehensive dossier on his firm's fraudulent asset allocations. I want a direct, undeniable paper trail linking his stolen funds to my parents' compromised retirement accounts. When this Ponzi scheme completely collapses, I want the legal authority to instantly seize the Buckhead property and freeze all of his remaining assets before his other creditors even know what hit them." "Consider it done," the lawyer replied, his tone laced with absolute lethal precision. I stood up from my chair, smoothing the lines of my tailored blazer. My family wanted me to play the role of the pathetic, subservient errand girl. They wanted me to fetch dry cleaning and marvel at their fake stolen wealth. They thought they had successfully crushed my spirit and relegated me to the absolute bottom of their twisted social hierarchy. They had no idea that I was currently holding the digital keys to their total financial annihilation. Chad wanted his bespoke Italian tuxedo delivered directly to the country club. I would make absolutely certain he looked immaculate for his wedding day. I wanted him to look his absolute best when the federal agents inevitably stormed his lavish reception and placed him in handcuffs in front of every single elite guest he had spent months trying to impress. I looked around the boardroom, meeting the eyes of my deeply loyal, highly aggressive corporate team. "We will reconvene to finalize the hostile takeover in exactly 2 hours," I announced calmly, grabbing my designer purse from the side table. "Right now, I have to go pick up a suit. It is a family emergency." The heavy oak doors of the boardroom clicked shut behind me, sealing my executive team inside to finalize the $2 billion acquisition. I did not pause or look back. I strode down the expansive glass corridor of the penthouse level, my heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic tempo against the imported Italian marble. My executive assistant, Elena, stepped seamlessly out of her adjacent office and fell into perfect step beside me. She held a sleek digital tablet, her eyes tracking my completely calm, unreadable expression. "I need you to execute a priority real estate acquisition," I told Elena, my voice dropping into a crisp, authoritative register that left absolutely no room for error. "There is a historic mega mansion currently listed on the private market in the Buckhead district. The asking price is $12 million. I want it purchased today this afternoon." Elena did not blink. She merely tapped her screen, pulling up the exclusive private real estate database. "Found it," she replied smoothly. "The historic Montgomery estate. It has been on the market for 3 weeks. There is a pending offer currently under review, but the escrow funds have not materialized." "That pending offer belongs to Chad," I said, a razor-sharp smile curving my lips. "He is currently standing on the master balcony playing pretend. Call the listing agent immediately. Tell them Aegis Holdings is making a $13 million non-contingent all-cash offer. Waive all inspections. Waive the financing contingency. Tell them the cash will hit their brokerage account in exactly 20 minutes, provided the deed is signed over to my holding company by 4 o'clock today." Elena nodded, her fingers flying across her tablet. "Consider it done. Is there a specific strategic value to this property? Or is this a personal acquisition?" "It is highly strategic," I replied, stepping into my private elevator and turning to face her as the glass doors began to slide shut. "That estate is not just a house. It encompasses the historic botanical gardens. The exact gardens my sister and Chad have rented out for their lavish wedding reception this Saturday. By the time I bring him his dry cleaning, I will be his landlord and the sole legal owner of his entire wedding venue." The elevator doors sealed shut, leaving Elena to execute the financial strike. I descended 50 stories in absolute silence, feeling the hum of the city vibrating through the steel and glass. Chad was a fool. He was a small-time grifter trying to swim in an ocean of genuine corporate predators, and he had absolutely no idea how outmatched he was. He was attempting to use the illusion of wealth to secure a $12 million mansion, likely planning to string the sellers along with fake wire confirmations and empty promises until after the wedding. He wanted the prestige of the address to impress my parents and manipulate his new investors. Instead, I had just bought it out from under him in less time than it takes to drink a cup of coffee. My armored SUV was waiting for me at the curb. I slid into the back seat and instructed my driver to take me to the elite bespoke tailor in Midtown. The transition back into the subservient invisible sister was a psychological exercise I had perfected over a lifetime of emotional abuse. I smoothed my features, softening the sharp edges of my corporate persona. I was no longer Kiara the billionaire CEO. I was Kiara the struggling college dropout, the family embarrassment sent to run errands for the golden child. The tailor shop was a masterpiece of old-world luxury, smelling of rich mahogany, expensive wool, and aged leather. I walked up to the front counter, keeping my posture slightly hunched, completely masking the fact that I could buy the entire building with a single phone call. "I am here to pick up a suit for Chad," I told the impeccably dressed manager standing behind the register. The manager's polite smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of profound, barely concealed irritation. "Ah, yes. Chad." He sighed, his tone dripping with patrician disdain. He signaled an assistant to fetch the garment bag. "We have the tuxedo ready. However, we cannot release the garment until the outstanding balance on the account is settled in full." I widened my eyes, playing the part of the confused messenger perfectly. Outstanding balance? I thought he was a VIP client here. The manager let out a dry, humorless scoff. He likes to tell people he is a VIP. The reality is that his last 3 credit cards were declined when we tried to run the final alteration fees yesterday. We have been leaving him voicemails all morning. The balance is $4,200. If you cannot pay it right now, the suit stays here. The pieces of Chad's fragile financial house of cards were crumbling in plain sight. He could not even afford the alterations on his own wedding suit, yet he was standing on the balcony of a $12 million mansion bragging about his wealth. He was completely broke. The venture capital funds were entirely gone. I pulled the beat-up student credit card from my wallet, the one my mother had demanded I use. I handed it to the manager. "Please run this," I said softly. The manager swiped the card. The terminal beeped a harsh, immediate decline. Insufficient funds. Of course there were insufficient funds. The card had a $10,000 limit, and I had already maxed it out paying the Parisian florist through my micro-lending firm. I looked down, pretending to be deeply embarrassed. "I am so sorry," I whispered. "Let me use a different card." I reached into my designer bag and pulled out a sleek, heavy, solid black titanium card. It had no name, no bank logo, just a secure microchip. It was a direct line to my personal offshore reserves. The manager took the heavy metal card, his brow furrowing in confusion. He swiped it. The transaction approved instantly, faster than the terminal could even print the receipt. I signed the merchant's slip with a quick, illegible scrawl. As the manager handed me the heavy velvet garment bag containing Chad's pristine tuxedo, my phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a secure text message from Elena. "The wire transfer is complete. The sellers accepted the all-cash offer. The deed has been legally transferred to Aegis Holdings. You are officially the owner of the Montgomery estate and the botanical gardens." I slipped the phone back into my pocket, a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline flooding my veins. I carried the heavy garment bag out of the tailor shop and handed it to my driver, who carefully hung it in the back of the SUV. I climbed in, sinking into the plush leather seats as we pulled out into the dense Atlanta traffic, heading straight for the exclusive Buckhead Country Club, where my family was currently having their pre-wedding lunch. The sheer poetry of the situation was intoxicating. Chad was currently driving back from the Montgomery estate, completely unaware that his fake real estate transaction had been permanently canceled. He was going to walk into that country club, surrounded by my fawning, status-obsessed parents, and brag about the massive mansion he had just bought for Nia. He was going to bask in their admiration, feeding his massive ego with their desperate validation. And I was going to be the one to hand him his suit. I was going to look him directly in the eye, knowing with absolute terrifying certainty that he was a penniless fraud. He did not own the mansion. He did not own the wedding venue. He did not even own the very suit he was planning to get married in. I owned the mansion. I owned the venue. I owned the debt on his tuxedo. I owned his fraudulent company through the emergency floral loan. I had systematically purchased every single aspect of his fake life, and he was completely blind to the invisible cage closing in around him. As the SUV approached the grand wrought iron gates of the country club, I pulled out a small compact mirror and checked my reflection. I wiped away any trace of corporate ruthlessness, ensuring my face looked appropriately tired and subservient. I was the good, obedient daughter, the failure, the errand girl. I stepped out of the vehicle, draped the heavy velvet garment bag over my arm, and walked up the grand stone steps of the club. Through the massive glass windows of the main dining room, I could see them. My father holding a glass of scotch, laughing loudly at something Chad was saying. my mother looking at her future son-in-law with pure adoration. Nia completely absorbed in her own reflection in her phone camera. They were a picture of perfect, unbothered elite society. They were so incredibly certain of their superiority. They were so confident that tomorrow would be the crowning achievement of their social climbing lives. I pushed open the heavy oak doors and stepped into the dining room, holding Chad's suit, like a trophy of his impending destruction. The game was no longer about defending myself against their petty insults. The game was now about total, absolute annihilation, and I was going to enjoy every single second of it. I walked straight toward their table, the heavy velvet garment bag draped over my forearm. My father was mid-laugh, holding his crystal glass of scotch, while Chad leaned back in his chair with the arrogant posture of a king holding court. When my mother spotted me, her smile instantly dropped, replaced by a tight warning glare. I kept my face perfectly blank, stepping up to the table and offering the garment bag directly to Chad. "Here is your suit, Chad," I said, keeping my voice soft and subservient. "The tailor sends his regards." Chad did not even look at me. He snatched the velvet bag from my arm with a sharp tug, handing it carelessly to a passing waiter to hang up. "Took you long enough," he muttered, checking his diamond watch. "You need to learn how to manage your time better, Kiara. In the real business world, being late costs millions." I nodded meekly, folding my hands in front of me. "I am sorry. Traffic was heavy." My father let out a heavy sigh, shaking his head. "Do not bother lecturing her, Chad. She does not understand the stakes we deal with. Why don't you go find a seat at the bar, Kiara? We are discussing the final vendor payouts." I turned to leave, but out of the corner of my eye I saw Chad's phone light up on the table. A barrage of urgent text messages flooded his lock screen. Even from a distance, my trained eyes caught the frantic capitalization of the senders, demanding immediate callbacks. Chad's arrogant posture faltered for a fraction of a second. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. His Ponzi scheme was running out of oxygen, and his investors were clearly closing in. He stood up abruptly, clearing his throat and forcing a wide, artificial smile. "Actually, Gregory, I need to excuse myself for an hour. I have a syndicate of Swiss investors begging to throw capital into my new tech fund. I need to swing by the house, grab my secure laptop, and take this conference call in private. The market waits for no man." My mother practically swooned at his dedication, while my father nodded in deep respect. "Go handle your empire, son. We will order your lunch for when you get back." Chad hurried out of the dining room, his pace just a little too frantic for a man in complete control. I walked toward the bar, ordering a sparkling water, completely unbothered. I knew exactly where he was going, and I knew exactly why. The perspective shifts, taking on a sharp, disorienting Dutch angle as the camera tracks Chad's frantic footsteps, echoing through the empty, cavernous halls of my parents' house. The slanted framing captures the absolute chaos unraveling behind his pristine facade. He is completely alone. His tie is loosened, his expensive shirt clinging to his back with cold sweat. He is not here for a conference call. He is a cornered animal backed to the very edge of a financial cliff. The fake $12 million cash offer he made on the Buckhead mansion was an act of pure, unadulterated desperation. He needed to show his angry investors a fake real estate portfolio to buy himself another week of breathing room. But to get the bridge loan required to actually sustain the illusion, he needs collateral. He needs a pitch. He needs a revolutionary intellectual property asset to dangle in front of a new group of gullible venture capitalists. The camera follows him as he bypasses the grand home office and heads straight down the hall, pushing open the door to my old childhood bedroom. Chad tears through the space like a thief. He rips open my desk drawers, tossing old notebooks and high school textbooks onto the floor. He remembers the family mocking my degree. He remembers the jokes about me writing useless code and playing with artificial intelligence algorithms. He thinks I am a naive, struggling student. He thinks whatever academic project I am working on will be just sophisticated enough to steal, rebrand, and sell to a desperate angel investor as his own proprietary software. His hands tremble as he finds it. Tucked beneath a stack of old-fashioned magazines is my secondary backup laptop. It is a sleek, matte black machine, devoid of any stickers or markings. Chad lets out a ragged breath of relief, dropping into my desk chair and flipping the screen open. He plugs a silver encrypted flash drive into the side port, his eyes darting toward the bedroom door, terrified that the family might return early. The lock screen requires a password. Chad smirks, typing in my birth year, followed by my middle name. The screen flashes red. Denied. He curses under his breath, trying my mother's name. Denied. Desperate, he pulls out his phone, quickly searching for a basic brute force password bypass software he downloaded for corporate espionage. He runs the program, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen, completely convinced of his own technological superiority. Meanwhile, back at the country club, I was sitting quietly at the polished marble bar. I took a slow sip of my lime-infused water as a silent high-priority alert flashed across the screen of my secure mobile device. Remote intrusion detected. Device K archive black. Location family residence. A cold, genuine smile spread across my face. I set my glass down and opened the hidden security overlay application on my phone. The interface immediately provided me with a live, real-time feed of exactly what was happening on that laptop. I could see the brute force software Chad was attempting to run. It was a pathetic, outdated script that my firewall would normally crush and lock down in milliseconds. He was looking for a lifeline. He was trying to steal my academic work to save his fraudulent empire. I tapped a sequence of commands on my screen. I did not lock him out. I did not shut down the device. Instead, I manually disabled the secondary firewall. I deliberately opened the gates, giving his crude hacking software the illusion of a successful breach. On Chad's end, the screen flashed a brilliant, welcoming green. Access granted. He let out a sharp bark of victorious laughter, quickly opening the hard drive directories. He searched frantically for anything labeled with financial forecasting or algorithmic trading. Sitting at the country club bar, I watched his cursor move across my system. With a few swift keystrokes, I manipulated the file directory. I unhid a specific, highly classified folder and pushed it directly to the center of his desktop. The folder was named Project Phoenix Predictive AI Market Analysis. Chad's cursor froze over the icon. I could practically smell the greed radiating from his location miles away. He clicked open the folder. Inside was a beautifully formatted, highly sophisticated business pitch deck, complete with market projections, stress test results, and a massive subfolder containing thousands of lines of raw source code. It looked like the holy grail of financial technology. It looked like a billion-dollar startup waiting to be launched. He highlighted the entire directory and dragged it straight onto his silver flash drive. What Chad did not know was that Project Phoenix was a digital bear trap. My company had designed that specific algorithm months ago as a honeypot to catch corporate spies. The source code was brilliant on the surface, but it was embedded with deep, catastrophic mathematical flaws. If anyone attempted to run that code in a live financial environment, it would systematically collapse, generating massive, unrecoverable error loops. Even worse, the moment the file was transferred to an external drive, a silent tracking script attached itself to the hardware. I now had the ability to track that flash drive anywhere in the world. I would know exactly which investors he pitched it to, which computers he plugged it into, and exactly when he tried to execute the stolen code. The progress bar on my phone hit 100%. Transfer complete. I watched the live feed as Chad hastily ejected the flash drive, shoved it deep into his trouser pocket, and slammed the laptop shut. I closed out of the security application and slipped my phone back into my designer bag, turning my attention back to the bustling country club dining room. My mother and father were laughing at a joke told by the club president, completely oblivious to the fact that their future son-in-law had just committed grand larceny in their own home. They had spent my entire life calling me a disappointment, demanding that I bow down to a man who was nothing more than a desperate, thieving parasite. I picked up my glass of sparkling water and took a final refreshing sip. Chad had just stolen the rope I carefully laid out for him. Now all I had to do was wait for him to try and build his bridge step out onto the fragile planks and watch the entire structure violently disintegrate beneath his feet. The ambient lighting of the exclusive downtown private club cast a warm golden glow over the sea of tailored suits and designer evening gowns. A continuous fluid tracking shot of this room would capture a symphony of extreme concentrated wealth. It would glide past towering displays of crystal champagne coupes, hover over silver trays loaded with imported caviar, and seamlessly weave through clusters of elite white-collar power brokers. Ultimately, that imaginary lens would settle directly on the epicenter of the room. Chad. He stood bathed in the soft spotlight of his own manufactured glory, wearing the exact bespoke Italian tuxedo that I had paid to rescue from the tailor just a few days prior. He was holding a tumbler of expensive bourbon, his chest puffed out, as he commanded the attention of a circle of highly influential old-money venture capitalists. These were the apex predators of the city men who moved millions before breakfast. And Chad, with his stolen flash drive burning a hole in his pocket, was attempting to play them all. I moved silently along the periphery of the ballroom, entirely invisible. I had deliberately chosen my wardrobe for the evening to reflect the pathetic persona my family assigned to me. I wore a plain, oversized beige cardigan over a simple, shapeless dark dress, paired with scuffed practical flats. Among the sea of haute couture and diamond necklaces, I looked exactly like the struggling, out-of-place college dropout they believed me to be. I paused near a massive cascading floral arrangement, allowing the thick foliage to shield me as I tuned in to the conversation happening just a few feet away. My father, Gregory, was holding a glass of red wine, his posture mirroring the arrogant stance Chad was currently employing across the room. He was speaking to a prominent local real estate developer, a man whose portfolio was worth hundreds of millions. I am telling you, Richard, my father boasted, his voice loud enough to ensure the surrounding guests could hear his absolute triumph. Chad is a visionary. This Project Phoenix algorithm he has developed is going to completely disrupt the high-frequency trading sector. The projected returns are astronomical. You want to get in on this before the institutional banks swallow it whole. The developer raised a skeptical eyebrow, taking a slow sip of his drink. It sounds ambitious, Gregory, but algorithmic trading is a saturated market. What makes his software any different? My mother, Valerie, instantly stepped into the conversation, her eyes shining with blind, unadulterated pride. It is revolutionary, she insisted, placing a heavily jeweled hand on my father's arm. We believe in Chad so completely that Gregory and I have actually decided to leverage our primary residence. We are taking out a massive second mortgage to secure a Tier 1 equity stake in his seed round. We are transferring the funds tomorrow morning. You simply do not pass up an opportunity to invest in family when the family is a certified genius. I stood frozen behind the flowers, a sharp spike of cold disbelief piercing through my chest. They were mortgaging the family home, the house I grew up in. They were literally signing away their last remaining tangible asset, betting their entire financial survival on a man who was actively running a Ponzi scheme. They were throwing their life savings into a black hole, fully convinced they were buying a golden ticket to the billionaire class. Any lingering shred of guilt I might have harbored for the trap I had set instantly evaporated. They were not just innocent victims of Chad's manipulation. They were eager, greedy participants in their own destruction. They were willing to risk absolute ruin just to secure their proximity to perceived power. Before I could fully process the sheer magnitude of their foolishness, a sharp, manicured hand grabbed my upper arm, yanking me roughly out of my thoughts and pulling me behind a heavy velvet curtain near the service hallway. I stumbled slightly, catching my balance as I looked up into the furious, heavily contoured face of my mother. Valerie's eyes were wide with panic and venom, her grip on my arm tight enough to leave painful bruises. "What in the world are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice a harsh, frantic whisper. "Who told you to come to this event?" I blinked, playing the role of the confused, wounded daughter with flawless precision. "Chad sent a mass email to the family," I said, keeping my voice low and hesitant. "He said it was a major launch party for his new company. I just wanted to be here to support him and Nia." Valerie looked me up and down, her lip curling in absolute disgust as she took in my plain cardigan and cheap shoes. "You look like a maid, Kiara. You look like you wandered in off the street to ask for spare change. Do you have any idea how important the people in this room are? These are elite investors, men who control global markets. Chad is about to secure millions of dollars in funding for a project that will elevate this entire family to the next level. She stepped closer, her expensive perfume suffocating in the tight shadowed space. I will not let your pathetic, miserable presence ruin this night. I will not have you standing around looking like a failure while Chad is trying to project an image of absolute success. You are an embarrassment to me, and you are an embarrassment to your sister. I kept my head bowed, staring at the polished hardwood floor, letting my shoulders slump in simulated defeat. I am sorry, Mom, I whispered. I can leave right now if you want me to. She let out an exasperated breath, waving her hand dismissively. It is too late for that. People have already seen you walk in. If you leave now, it will just draw more attention and prompt unwanted questions. Just go stand in the back, find a dark corner near the catering doors, and stay completely out of sight. Do not speak to anyone. Do not eat anything. And whatever you do, do not go anywhere near Chad while he is pitching to the investors. Do you understand me? Yes, Mom, I said softly. She gave me one final withering glare before smoothing the lines of her designer gown and marching back out into the glittering ballroom. She instantly replaced her vicious scowl with a bright, welcoming smile as she approached a group of potential investors. I stepped out from behind the velvet curtain, moving silently along the back wall until I reached the darkest corner of the room. I settled into the heavy shadows cast by the massive audio-visual equipment setup. I leaned against the cool plaster of a structural pillar and crossed my arms over my chest. I watched the room. I watched my mother eagerly fetch a fresh drink for a wealthy financier. I watched Nia loudly showing off her diamond ring to a group of bored socialites, and I watched Chad. The overhead crystal chandelier suddenly dimmed, plunging the room into a dramatic, expectant hush. A single brilliant spotlight illuminated the small stage at the front of the ballroom. Chad walked up the carpeted steps holding a wireless microphone. His face was projected onto the massive dual screens behind him. The elite crowd erupted into polite anticipatory applause. "Thank you," Chad said, his voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. He sounded so incredibly sure of himself. He sounded exactly like a man who believed he had already won the war. "Thank you all for being here tonight. You are standing on the precipice of a financial revolution. For the past year, my firm has been developing a proprietary artificial intelligence. It is a predictive algorithmic trading model that will completely eliminate risk from high-frequency market transactions. We call it Project Phoenix." He reached into the pocket of his tuxedo. He pulled out the small silver encrypted flash drive. The exact flash drive he had stolen from my childhood bedroom. "Tonight, I am not just going to pitch you an idea," Chad announced, his grin stretching from ear to ear. "I am going to show you the future. I am going to run a live real-time simulation of the Phoenix algorithm against the current Asian market indices. You are going to watch this software generate massive profit out of thin air." He turned to the sleek acrylic podium and plugged the silver drive into the master terminal. From my position deep in the shadows, completely hidden from the family that despised me, I reached into the pocket of my oversized cardigan. I pulled out my secure mobile device. The screen was already glowing with the live remote connection to the stolen flash drive. The honeypot was fully armed. The digital trap was primed. I opened my encrypted messaging application and selected Elena's contact file. I did not hesitate. I did not feel a single drop of remorse. My mother had demanded I stand in the dark so I would not ruin their moment. She had absolutely no idea that the dark was exactly where I operated best. I typed out a single definitive command: "Activate the error sequence." I hit send, slipped the phone back into my pocket, and looked up at the massive projection screens waiting for the fire to catch. The massive dual screens behind Chad flared to life. For exactly 4 seconds, the simulation was a breathtaking display of technological supremacy. Fluid graphs materialized in high-definition charting market fluctuations, with terrifying speed predicting micro-movements in Asian markets and projecting millions in theoretical profit. A collective murmur of awe rippled through the ballroom. My father beamed, puffing his chest out. Chad stood at the podium, basking in the glow of the screens, his arms spread wide like a modern-day messiah delivering salvation to the ultra-rich. Then the hidden payload executed. The fluid blue and green graphs stuttered. The numbers froze mid-calculation. A harsh, grating digital screech erupted from the state-of-the-art sound system, loud enough to make several socialites cover their ears. The dual screens violently glitched, fracturing into a chaotic mosaic of broken code before flashing to a blinding, solid crimson red. Massive, bold white text dominated the displays, pulsing like a warning beacon. Critical failure. Algorithmic integrity compromised. Intellectual property theft detected. System lockdown initiated. The reality of the room pushed in fast and hard on Chad's face. The smug, self-satisfied grin melted away, replaced instantly by sheer, unadulterated terror. The color drained from his cheeks. His eyes darted frantically between the apocalyptic red screens and the sea of elite investors. He stabbed wildly at the keyboard of his laptop, his fingers a blur of panic, desperately trying to exit the program, abort the sequence, or force a reboot. The laptop was completely dead-bricked from the inside out by my proprietary countermeasures. "This is just a minor glitch," Chad stammered into the microphone, his voice cracking, completely devoid of its previous arrogant boom. "It is just the country club network. The firewall here is interfering with the raw processing power of the Phoenix algorithm. Please just give me one moment to bypass their local security." Nobody in the room was buying it. These were not naive marks. These were veteran venture capitalists who had survived the dot-com bubble and a dozen market crashes. They recognized a catastrophic failure when they saw one. The heavy silence in the room morphed into aggressive, angry murmurs. A prominent hedge fund manager in the front row slammed his drink down on a cocktail table and turned his back on the stage, signaling the end of his interest. Others immediately followed suit, shaking their heads in disgust and walking away. The billionaires Chad had so desperately courted were evaporating like smoke. "Wait!" Chad pleaded, his voice climbing an octave as he practically leaned over the podium. "I have the backup data. I can walk you through the predictive models manually. The code is flawless, I assure you." A security protocol error message flashed across the screens, completely overriding his desperate pleas. It displayed a scrolling list of all the stolen files currently being permanently encrypted and deleted from his hardware. At the center table, the horrific reality of the situation crashed down upon my parents. My father dropped his wine glass. It shattered against the polished floor, splashing dark red across the hem of a nearby guest's gown, but he did not even notice. He was staring at the red screens with a look of absolute devastation. Valerie grabbed his arm, her manicured fingers digging into his suit jacket. "Gregory," she gasped, her voice trembling with rising hysteria. "Gregory, what is happening? The transfer, the second mortgage. Tell me the bank has not processed the wire yet. Tell me we can stop it." My father looked at her, his face ashen, entirely stripped of his usual pompous authority. "I authorized the release at noon," he whispered, his voice completely hollow. "The funds are gone, Valerie. They are in his corporate holding account." My mother let out a strangled, breathless sob, bringing a hand to her mouth as her knees buckled slightly. The realization that they had just mortgaged their entire future, betting their primary residence on a man who was currently sweating profusely on stage while his stolen presentation self-destructed, was finally sinking in. They were financially ruined. The mansion they lived in was effectively gone, traded for a stake in a fraudulent company that had just publicly died in front of the city's elite. Nia was standing near the stage, looking back and forth between Chad and our parents, completely lost, entirely unequipped to handle a crisis that could not be solved with a credit card or a social media post. She stepped toward the podium, whining Chad's name, asking him to fix it to make the red screens go away so the party could continue. He ignored her, violently ripping the dead flash drive from the port and slamming his fists against the acrylic podium in a display of impotent rage. From my position, hidden deep within the shadows of the room, I watched the absolute carnage unfold. My trap had executed with flawless precision. Chad was exposed as an incompetent fraud to the very people he needed to survive. My parents were reaping the immediate devastating consequences of their own greed and their willingness to blindly trust a con artist while constantly degrading their own flesh and blood. There was no shouting match, There was no dramatic monologue where I stepped into the light and claimed my victory. True power does not need an audience to validate its existence. True power is walking away while the building burns knowing you were the one who held the match. I let a slow, icy smile touch my lips. I pulled the oversized cardigan tighter around my shoulders, maintaining my disguise as the invisible, irrelevant failure of the family. Keeping my head down, I slipped seamlessly through the heavy catering doors and exited into the quiet, cool air of the service hallway. I walked calmly out the back entrance of the country club, leaving the chaotic, frantic shouting of my family echoing behind me. They had created this nightmare entirely on their own, and now they were going to have to live in it. The cold night air hit my face as I stepped out of the service exit, but my heart was even colder. If a passing stranger had seen me walking calmly to my car, while my family's entire financial existence burned to ashes inside that country club, they might have thought me a monster. They might have wondered how a daughter could orchestrate such absolute ruthless destruction without feeling a single drop of remorse. To fully understand the complete absence of my pity, you would have to rewind the clock exactly 24 hours. You would have to witness the wedding rehearsal dinner. If you were to film that night, the opening shot would require a tight, over-the-shoulder camera angle positioned directly behind me. Looking past my plain, unstyled hair and the cheap fabric of my conservative dress, the lens would focus on the breathtaking, opulent head table situated at the very center of the private banquet hall. The contrast would be staggering. The rehearsal dinner was a masterclass in manufactured aristocracy. Chad's family had flown in, bringing with them the suffocating, arrogant weight of generational wealth. His parents sat at the center of the head table like royalty holding court. His father wore a custom-tailored suit that cost more than most people earned in a year, and his mother was draped in diamonds that caught the light with every condescending tilt of her head. They were the epitome of upper-class white elite society, and they looked at everyone in the room with barely concealed boredom. My parents, Gregory and Valerie, were practically vibrating with desperate, pathetic energy. The over-the-shoulder view would capture them leaning across the table, laughing too loudly at jokes that were not funny, aggressively refilling wine glasses, and nodding vigorously at every mundane statement Chad's parents made. My mother had spent weeks rehearsing for this exact night, buying a dress she could barely afford just to project an image of equal standing. My father was acting like a subservient court jester, desperate to prove that the union of our families was a merger of equals. It was a humiliating display of social climbing, a raw desperation to belong to a world that was only tolerating them because of Chad. But I was not allowed to sit at that table. I was not allowed to sit at the adjacent family tables, nor the tables reserved for the bridal party, nor even the tables set aside for distant cousins and corporate acquaintances. I looked down at the small embossed placement card in my hand. It read Kiara, Table 14. I began the long walk across the banquet hall. I passed Table 1, adorned with massive cascading white orchids and imported crystal glassware. I passed Table 5, where the groomsmen were already loudly ordering expensive scotch. I passed Table 10, where the ambient lighting was still warm and inviting. I kept walking until the thick, luxurious carpeting gave way to scuffed hardwood. Table 14 was pushed as far into the back corner of the room as physically possible. It was shoved directly against the heavy, swinging metal doors of the catering kitchen. Every time a waiter pushed through the doors, a harsh blast of industrial fluorescent light cut through the dim ambiance, accompanied by the chaotic shouting voices of the kitchen staff and the sharp clatter of dirty silverware. There were no cascading orchids on Table 14. There was only a single unlit tea candle. The chairs were not draped in silk. They were standard folding chairs pulled from a storage closet. I pulled out a chair and sat down. My dinner companions were already there. To my left sat the hired wedding photographer, furiously swapping out camera lenses and avoiding eye contact. To my right sat his young lighting assistant, who was currently eating a bread roll with the exhausted speed of someone who had been working on his feet for 12 hours. Across from me sat two off-duty catering servers, taking their designated 15-minute meal break. They looked at me with a mixture of confusion and profound pity. They recognized that I was the sister of the bride, and they knew exactly what it meant that I had been seated with the hired help. My parents had not simply run out of space. This was a calculated, deliberate act of erasure. They were terrified that my presence, my lack of designer clothes, and my quiet demeanor would somehow shatter the illusion of flawless wealth they were trying to sell to Chad's parents. I was a stain they were trying to hide in the dark. I sat quietly folding my hands in my lap, staring at the blank white tablecloth. The servers were served a different meal than the guests. While the main room feasted on filet mignon and butter-poached lobster, a busboy dropped a lukewarm plate of dry chicken and overcooked vegetables in front of me. I picked up my fork completely unbothered and took a bite. I was used to the taste of disrespect. The heavy kitchen doors swung open, blasting me with a gust of hot air and the smell of dish soap. When the doors settled, I saw her walking toward me. Yeah. My sister Nia looked breathtaking. She wore a custom silk rehearsal gown that clung to her figure, her hair and makeup professionally styled to look effortlessly flawless. As she navigated through the tables, she wore a bright, radiant smile, graciously accepting compliments from the passing guests. But as she moved further back, crossing the invisible boundary into the shadows of the service area, the smile melted off her face instantly. The warm, glowing bride vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stranger. The photographer and his assistant immediately stopped eating and looked down at their plates, intimidated by her sudden, aggressive presence. Naya did not even acknowledge they were sitting there. She stepped directly behind my chair and leaned down, bringing her face uncomfortably close to my ear. I could smell the expensive champagne on her breath and the heavy floral scent of her designer perfume. She placed her hands on the back of my folding chair, her manicured nails digging into the cheap plastic. "I hope you are comfortable back here, Kiara." Nia whispered, her voice a sharp, venomous hiss, designed to be heard only by me. "Mom wanted to leave you at the house, but I told her people would ask questions if the sister of the bride was missing entirely. This was the best compromise we could find." I did not turn to look at her. I kept my eyes focused on my plate. "I am fine, Nia. The food is fine." She let out a short, breathy scoff of disbelief. "Look at you. You did not even try. You are wearing a sweater to a formal dinner." Chad's mother asked me why my sister dresses like a substitute teacher, and I actually had to lie and tell her you were going through a difficult emotional phase. "You are an absolute embarrassment to this family." I remained perfectly still. I did not defend myself. I did not explain that I wore the sweater because our mother had explicitly forbidden me from wearing anything that might draw attention away from the bridal party. I simply absorbed the venom, letting it fuel the cold fire burning in my chest. Nia leaned in even closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous, commanding tone. "Listen to me very carefully. You do not belong in this world, Kiara. You never have and you never will. These people out there, Chad's family, they operate on a level you cannot even comprehend. Tomorrow is the most important day of my life, and I will not let your pathetic, miserable existence ruin it." She reached out, grabbing a strand of my hair and tucking it roughly behind my ear. "Tomorrow, you are going to stand in the background. You are going to hold my dress when I need to walk. You are going to fetch my makeup artist when I ask for her. You will be invisible. And above all else, do not open your mouth to Chad's family. Do not try to make conversation. Do not try to pretend you are part of their circle. You are just here to do a job, and then you are going to go back to your sad little apartment and leave us alone. Do we understand each other?" I slowly placed my fork down on the table. I turned my head just enough to catch the reflection of her furious, entitled eyes in the glass of a nearby water pitcher. I saw the absolute contempt she held for me. I saw a woman who viewed her own sister as nothing more than a peasant, a prop to be utilized and discarded. "Yes, Nia," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and devoid of any emotion. "I understand exactly what my role is tomorrow." "Good," she snapped, standing up straight and smoothing the front of her silk gown. "Try not to ruin the photos by looking so miserable." She turned on her heel immediately, pasting that bright, radiant fake smile back onto her face as she walked back into the golden light of the main ballroom. I watched her glide up to the head table, throwing her arms around Chad's neck and pressing a kiss to his cheek. I watched Chad's parents smile at her with polite manufactured affection. I watched my parents raise their glasses to toast a union built entirely on fraud, greed, and superficial posturing. I sat at table 14 listening to the kitchen doors swing open and shut. The lighting assistant next to me offered a sympathetic, uncomfortable grimace, pushing a basket of bread rolls toward my plate. I gave him a small, genuine smile of thanks and took a roll. That was the exact moment the final lock clicked into place in my mind. That was the moment I realized they were not just misguided family members blinded by ambition. They were cruel. They were toxic. They actively delighted in pushing me down to elevate themselves. As I sat there in the dark chewing on dry bread while my family drank vintage champagne, I mentally finalized the code for Project Phoenix. I knew Chad would steal my laptop the next morning. I had deliberately left it vulnerable, waiting for his desperation to override his common sense. But until that moment at table 14, I had debated whether or not to include the destructive payload. I had debated whether simply exposing his theft was enough. Nia's venomous whisper was the deciding factor. They wanted me to be invisible. They wanted me to be the silent, pathetic servant holding the hem of a dress I could never afford. They told me I did not belong in their world. They were absolutely right. I did not belong in their world of fake wealth and fragile egos. I belonged in the architecture of the systems that controlled them. I was the ghost in their machine. So 24 hours later, as I walked away from the country club and left them drowning in the catastrophic failure of Chad's stolen presentation, I felt nothing but profound, absolute peace. The trap had sprung. The illusion was shattered. They had demanded I stay in the dark, never realizing that the dark was exactly where I held all the power. Before I could even fully process the absolute finality of Nia's venomous whisper at table 14, a sharp tap on my shoulder jolted me back to the harsh reality of the catering section. I turned to see the head banquet manager looking down at me with a tight, uncomfortable expression. "Your father requested your presence in the rear service corridor," he said, his voice clipped and professional. "He asked that you hurry." I placed my cloth napkin on the table, offering a polite nod to the lighting assistant beside me, and stood up. I pushed through the heavy swinging metal doors, leaving the muffled sounds of the jazz band and clinking crystal behind me. The service corridor was a stark contrast to the opulent ballroom. It was bathed in harsh, buzzing fluorescent light, smelling of industrial bleach and discarded food. The air was stiflingly hot, venting from the massive commercial kitchens just down the hall. My father Marcus was pacing furiously across the stained concrete floor. If a camera were capturing this exact moment, the lens would drop to a sharp, extreme low angle, pointing directly up at him. The framing would artificially magnify his presence, making him appear as a towering, imposing figure of absolute authority. But the harsh overhead lighting betrayed him. It highlighted the nervous sweat beading on his forehead, the frantic darting of his eyes, and the way his expensive tailored suit suddenly looked suffocatingly tight across his shoulders. He was a man stretched to his absolute breaking point, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of unlimited wealth. He stopped pacing the second the heavy doors clicked shut behind me. He did not ask how I was doing. He did not apologize for banishing me to the vendor table. He marched straight toward me and shoved a black leather check presenter into my chest. "I need your debit card, Kiara," he demanded, his voice a harsh, frantic rasp. "Right now. Hand it over." I looked down at the leather booklet, then back up at his flushed face. "For what?" "Do not ask questions. Just give me the card," he snapped, running a trembling hand through his graying hair. Chad's parents just ordered 3 bottles of vintage Dom Perignon for the head table to celebrate the rehearsal. The venue requires a separate, immediate authorization for alcohol overages of this magnitude. It is $5,000. I need you to cover it. I stared at him, my expression perfectly blank. You want me to pay $5,000 for champagne that I am not even allowed to sit in the same room to drink? I am a student dad. I do not have that kind of money just sitting around. The low angle would capture the terrifying speed at which his panic mutated into explosive, unhinged rage. His face contorted, the veins in his neck bulging against his stiff white collar. "Do not lie to me, Kiara. he hissed, stepping so close I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. I know you have that pathetic little emergency savings account. I know you have been hoarding cash from those useless freelance coding gigs you do online. Transfer the funds right now. I do not care if it empties your account. Swipe the card. I shook my head, taking a single deliberate step back to establish my boundary. No. That money is strictly for my final semester tuition and my rent. I will not hand it over for a bar tab. Marcus let out a sound that was half scoff, half growl. He threw his hands up in the air, pacing in a tight circle, before pivoting back to glare down at me. You selfish, ignorant child. Do you have any idea what is at stake here tonight? Do you understand the level of power sitting in that dining room? I do not have the liquid cash to cover this right now. I just leveraged the entire estate. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh, desperate whisper. I mortgaged this family's home to secure a Tier 1 equity stake in Chad's tech firm. I am playing a billionaire's game right now, securing a financial empire that will elevate this entire family for generations. I do not have the time or the liquidity to dig around for spare change to appease a venue manager. I looked at him, feeling a strange, profound sense of pity mixed with utter disgust. He was actually admitting it out loud. He was proud of it. He truly believed that handing his life savings to a con artist was a masterstroke of business acumen, and he was enraged that I would not sacrifice my own meager survival fund to maintain his fragile fake facade for one more night. You are the child in this family, Marcus dictated, jabbing a rigid finger toward my chest. You must know your place and you must behave. You owe us for the roof over your head and the food on your plate. You will swipe this card to protect your sister's wedding and your family's reputation. I kept my hands firmly buried in the pockets of my oversized cardigan. I will not do it. His eyes widened in absolute shock. For a fraction of a second, he simply could not process the insubordination. He had spent his entire life demanding total compliance from my mother and my sister, and he had always received it. To have the daughter he considered the weakest link look him in the eye and refuse a direct order broke his mind. Fine, he roared, completely abandoning any attempt to keep his voice down. The sound echoed violently off the concrete walls of the service corridor. You want to be defiant? You want to hoard your little pennies while the rest of us build an empire? You are done. I am officially cutting off your final semester tuition. Do not bother sending the invoice to my accountant. I will not fund the education of a daughter who refuses to support her own blood. You are cut off, Kiara. You can sink or swim on your own. You are entirely on your own. The perspective instantly shifts. The imaginary camera drops the imposing low angle of my father and moves to a smooth, incredibly steady eye-level tracking shot. It slowly pushes in on my face, capturing my reaction with razor-sharp clarity. There are no tears. There is no trembling lip. There is no panicked apology or desperate begging. My features remain perfectly, chillingly still. The threat of losing my tuition would have devastated the girl my father thought I was. He thought he was delivering a fatal blow to my future. He had no idea that my hidden freelance work had already secured me a quiet, untraceable fortune. He had no idea that I could buy and sell his heavily mortgaged estate 10 times over without breaking a sweat. I maintained steady, unbroken eye contact with the man who had just discarded me over a bottle of wine. Are you absolutely sure about this? Dad, I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm, devoid of any inflection. You will not take this back. Marcus mistook my calm for shock. He thought I was paralyzed by the weight of his authority. He drew himself up to his full height, his face a mask of absolute unforgiving contempt. Get out of my sight, he snarled. I did not flinch. I simply nodded once, accepting the terms of my release. I turned on my heel and walked away. I did not go back into the ballroom. I did not return to table 14. I walked straight down the long fluorescent hallway, pushed open the heavy emergency exit doors, and stepped out into the cool, refreshing night air of the parking lot. Every single tie had been severed. Every lingering obligation I might have felt toward my bloodline had been burned to ash in that corridor. My father had not just abandoned me. He had actively tried to cannibalize my future to feed his own ego, and when I refused, he discarded me like trash. I pulled my car keys from my pocket, unlocking my modest, unassuming sedan. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. The dashboard clock glowed brightly in the dark cabin. Tomorrow was the big day. Tomorrow, Chad would stand on a brightly lit stage and attempt to pitch Project Phoenix to a room full of elite investors. Tomorrow, he would plug my stolen flash drive into the main terminal, completely unaware that he was arming a digital bomb. I shifted the car into drive and pulled out of the country club lot, my mind razor sharp and perfectly clear. My father had just told me I was on my own. He had told me to sink or swim. He had absolutely no idea that tomorrow I was going to be the only one who knew how to breathe underwater while the rest of them drowned. In my rearview mirror, the imposing facade of the country club quickly shrank into the darkness. If a cinematic lens were to capture this exact transition, it would execute a violent blurring whip pan, snapping directly from the memory of Marcus's red-faced, vein-popping fury in that fluorescent service corridor straight to my reflection in the rearview mirror. My face was illuminated by the soft blue glow of the dashboard, and a slow, completely unbothered, ice-cold smile finally broke across my lips. I reached out and tapped the digital interface on my console. The car's Bluetooth system chimed, connecting to a highly encrypted private network. I bypassed my standard contacts and dialed the direct unlisted number for the senior managing partner of my legal and asset management team. He answered on the first ring, his voice crisp and alert despite the late hour. "Vance," I said, keeping my eyes fixed on the empty, winding road ahead. "The trap has been triggered. The simulation failed exactly as we programmed it to. It is time." "Understood," Vance replied, the sound of rapid keystrokes already clicking in the background. "What are your specific parameters for the fallout?" "I want absolute scorched earth containment," I instructed, my tone purely transactional. "Draft the injunction and file it immediately. Freeze every single operational and personal account tied to Chadwick Capital. The grounds are blatant documented intellectual property theft. We have the digital footprint of him extracting Project Phoenix from my secondary drive, and we just witnessed him broadcast our proprietary code to a room full of witnesses. Lock him out of his own life. Make sure he cannot move a single cent. Consider it done. And your father's involvement. Marcus just confessed to me that he leveraged the family estate to secure an equity stake in Chad's vaporware." I said, the satisfying irony of the situation washing over me. "He authorized a massive wire transfer this morning. Chad's accounts are now holding those funds. Once you freeze Chadwick Capital, my father's money gets locked inside the vault. Notify the primary lending bank that the collateral used for Marcus's second mortgage has been inextricably linked to an active federal IP theft investigation. Trigger the immediate margin call. Force the bank to initiate foreclosure protocols on the family estate by tomorrow morning. That is going to trigger a catastrophic financial collapse for both parties." Within hours, Vance noted, his voice carrying a hint of professional admiration. "They will be entirely liquidated." "They made their bed," I replied smoothly. "Now they get to sleep in the ashes." "Are there any other preparations required for tomorrow?" Vance asked. "Yes," I said, my grip tightening slightly on the leather steering wheel. "Call my personal stylist. Tell her the disguise is officially retired. I need her to pull the bespoke crimson suit we tailored in Milan last month. I need the absolute sharpest, most intimidating power silhouette she can assemble delivered to my penthouse by dawn. Tomorrow is my sister's wedding, and I am no longer sitting at the vendor table in the back. I am going to be the one hosting the reception." I ended the call, the cabin of the car plunging back into a quiet, focused silence. Nia had demanded that I go back to my sad little apartment and stay out of their way. She truly believed I lived in some dilapidated studio, struggling to scrape together rent money from freelance coding gigs. That was the narrative I had carefully fed them for years, a necessary camouflage to keep their greedy hands off my actual assets. I bypassed the exit for the student district entirely. Instead, I drove straight into the heart of the city's most exclusive financial sector, pulling into the secure subterranean parking garage of a towering glass skyscraper. I parked my unassuming sedan in a private bay right next to my actual daily driver, a sleek, matte black Aston Martin. I took the private elevator directly to the top floor. The doors parted to reveal my sanctuary, a sprawling multi-million-dollar penthouse wrapped in floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic, commanding view of the city skyline. This was the empire I had built. While Chad was busy scamming desperate investors with fake pitch decks, and my father was busy draining his retirement accounts to buy country club memberships, I had been quietly engineering security algorithms that were currently protecting three of the largest banks in the hemisphere. They called me a dropout because I left a generic university program. They did not know I left because a premier tech conglomerate had bought my first patent for 8 figures. The next morning arrived with crisp, brilliant sunlight. True to his word, Vance had mobilized my entire team. By 6 in the morning, a heavy garment bag was delivered to my door. I showered, washing away the remnants of the pathetic, subservient character I had played for the last time. I unzipped the garment bag. The suit was a masterpiece of Italian tailoring. It was a deep, striking crimson, a color that demanded absolute attention and projected unwavering authority. The blazer was sharply structured, cinched perfectly at the waist, with lapels that looked sharp enough to draw blood. I paired it with sleek, towering stilettos and minimalist, heavy gold jewelry. I pulled my hair back into a severe, sleek style that left my face completely exposed, highlighting the sharp, predatory angle of my cheekbones. When I looked in the full-length mirror, the struggling invisible sister was completely gone. Staring back at me was the CEO, the architect of their destruction, the woman who literally held the deed to their lives. I checked my encrypted phone. Vance had sent a continuous stream of updates. The legal traps had snapped shut at exactly 8 a.m. Chad's corporate accounts were completely frozen under federal order. My father's bank had issued an automated, unignorable alert regarding the compromised collateral on the estate. The financial bomb had detonated, and the shockwaves were currently ripping through their pristine, fake reality. They would be in a state of absolute, frantic chaos right now. Chad would be desperately calling his bankers, finding his numbers disconnected and his access denied. My father would be staring at digital foreclosure notices, his arrogant chest caved in by panic as he realized his life savings were trapped behind a federal injunction. And Nia, utterly oblivious to the financial slaughter happening behind the scenes, would be sitting in a velvet chair having her makeup done, expecting a royal coronation. I grabbed my keys and headed for the private elevator. I did not take the unassuming sedan this time. I walked straight to the Aston Martin, the engine roaring to life with a deep, aggressive growl that echoed off the concrete walls of the garage. I drove toward the grand, historic botanical gardens where the wedding was being held. It was a venue that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars just to rent for the afternoon. A venue that my parents had proudly paid for, completely unaware that the massive check they wrote was going to bounce so hard it would shatter their teeth. I arrived exactly 1 hour before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The valet rushed forward to open the door of the Aston Martin, his eyes widening slightly at the sheer commanding presence of the vehicle and the woman stepping out of it. I handed him the keys without a word, my crimson heels clicking sharply against the cobblestone driveway. I did not head toward the cramped, chaotic bridal suite where Nia was undoubtedly screaming at her bridesmaids to fix her veil. I did not go to the vendor entrance where I had been banished the night before. I bypassed the anxious wedding planners and the bewildered catering staff who were currently wondering why the groom's credit card for the open bar had just been violently declined. I walked directly through the massive wrought iron front gates, striding straight up the center aisle of the pristine, empty ceremony space. The white floral arrangements looked pale and weak against the vibrant, unapologetic red of my suit. I reached the very front row, the row explicitly designated for the parents of the bride and the most important people in the room. I took the seat perfectly positioned in the center, crossed my legs, checked the time on my diamond watch, and waited for the show to begin. High above the sprawling, emerald canopy of Buckhead, the morning air was crisp and completely undisturbed. If a drone were hovering over the historic botanical estate right at that moment, capturing the scene from a sweeping, high-angle perspective, it would record an event of staggering, almost offensive opulence. The camera would glide down past centuries-old oak trees, over perfectly manicured hedges, and settle on the massive lawn where hundreds of guests were already gathering. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos navigated the sea of pastel gowns and dark designer suits, offering crystal flutes of vintage champagne to the city's most elite socialites, hedge fund managers, and venture capitalists. From that aerial view, everything looked like a flawless fairy tale. The lens would pan across the faces of my family, capturing their radiant, triumphant smiles. My mother Valerie was holding court near a massive tiered stone fountain, her laughter echoing brightly as she accepted fawning compliments on the weather and the extravagant floral decor. My father Marcus stood near the front row with Chad's father, aggressively clapping the older man on the shoulder. Marcus was projecting the ultimate image of a victorious patriarch who had finally arrived. He had no idea his financial life support had been permanently severed just hours ago. He was likely ignoring the frantic automated alerts buzzing relentlessly in his breast pocket, arrogant enough to assume the bank was simply verifying the massive fraudulent wire transfer he had authorized to Chad's firm. The contrast between the serene, picturesque beauty of the venue and the absolute financial slaughter currently occurring in the digital ether was intensely poetic. The floral arrangements towering custom-built arches of imported white roses and rare orchids framed an altar that was about to become ground zero for total devastation. I remained seated in the dead center of the front row. The bespoke crimson suit I wore was a deliberate, violent slash of color against the sea of muted, polite wedding tones. It was not just an outfit, it was a declaration of war. As the guests began to filter toward the seating area, I felt the heavy, confused stares of Chad's family and my parents' wealthy friends. Whispers rippled through the rows behind me like a sudden gust of wind through dry leaves. They recognized me as the sister of the bride, the quiet, unremarkable girl who was supposed to be fading silently into the background. They did not understand why I was occupying the most prominent seat in the house, radiating the kind of icy, untouchable authority that usually required decades of cutthroat corporate survival to master. My father noticed me just as the hired string quartet began to tune their instruments. He froze mid-conversation, his eyes locking onto the striking red fabric. For a split second, I saw his brain short-circuit. He had expected me to be gone, banished by his ruthless ultimatum the night before, assuming I was currently sitting in my apartment completely broken and desperate. Seeing me sitting there, draped in ruthless Italian tailoring and dripping with quiet, lethal confidence, threw him entirely off balance. He took a half-step toward me, his jaw tightening in fury, the veins in his neck beginning to throb against his collar. But a sharp, unified chord from the violins interrupted his approach. The ceremony was starting. The guests took their seats in a synchronized wave of rustling silk and murmured apologies. Marcus was forced to sit 2 seats away from me, his body rigidly locked with unspoken rage, unable to cause a scene in front of the billionaires he was trying so desperately to impress. The music swelled, transitioning into a rich, triumphant bridal march that vibrated through the manicured gardens. The heavy oak doors at the back of the stone pathway swung open. Nia stepped into the brilliant sunlight. She looked absolutely flawless, a breathtaking vision of manufactured perfection. Her custom gown, a staggering $20,000 masterpiece of cascading silk hand-stitched pearls and intricate lace, trailed behind her on the pristine white carpet. Her veil caught the morning breeze, framing a face glowing with absolute unchecked arrogance. This was her coronation. She was walking down the aisle to claim her rightful place among the elite, preparing to marry a man she firmly believed held the keys to a kingdom of endless, effortless wealth. She moved with a slow, practiced grace, soaking in the audible gasps of admiration from the crowd. Her eyes were fixed on Chad, who stood at the altar looking uncharacteristically tense. Chad's usual smug, untouchable demeanor was slightly fractured this morning. His smile was tight, his jaw rigidly set, and his eyes darted occasionally toward his suit pocket. I knew exactly why. He had likely tried to purchase his groomsmen their morning coffees, or tip the valet only to find his platinum cards aggressively declined. He probably thought it was a simple fraud. Hold a temporary annoying glitch that he could yell at a private wealth manager to fix during the reception. He did not yet comprehend that his entire corporate infrastructure, his offshore accounts, and his personal holdings had been legally seized, drained, and locked down by federal order. As Nia approached the halfway point of the aisle, her gaze drifted downward from Chad's face to the front row. She was looking for me. She was expecting to see me standing off to the extreme side, wearing the drab sweater she had mocked, waiting to step forward and arrange the heavy train of her gown like a well-trained, obedient servant. Instead, her eyes found the brilliant, unapologetic crimson red of my suit. She stopped dead in her tracks. It was only for a fraction of a second, a minuscule, stuttering hesitation in her step, that no one else in the awestruck crowd would notice. But to me, the pause was deafening. I watched the triumphant, gloating glow instantly vanish from her face, replaced by a sudden, jarring shock. Her eyes widened as she took in my relaxed posture, the fiercely expensive cut of the fabric, and the cold, predatory calm radiating from my expression. I did not offer her a supportive, sisterly smile. I did not look away out of habit or submission. I held her gaze with the terrifying absolute stillness of an apex predator watching its prey step willingly into an inescapable trap. Nia quickly recovered, forcing her brilliant smile back into place and resuming her measured walk, but the psychological damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted deep in her mind. She reached the altar, handing her extravagant bouquet to her maid of honor with a slightly trembling hand. She stepped up to stand opposite Chad, the two of them joining hands representing a perfect hollow illusion built on stolen code and mortgaged lies. The officiant stepped forward to the microphone, his voice booming gently across the quiet sun-drenched gardens. He welcomed the distinguished guests, speaking eloquently about celebrating a union built on trust, unwavering partnership, and a shared prosperous vision for the future. Every beautiful word he spoke tasted like ash. I sat back in my chair, crossing my legs elegantly, the sharp point of my stiletto resting perfectly still against the grass. The sky above Buckhead was a clear, brilliant blue, completely devoid of clouds. But a hurricane of my own precise making was already tearing through the foundational pillars of their lives. The primary lending bank was moving to seize my father's estate. Federal investigators were finalizing the digital paperwork on Chad's stolen intellectual property. The high-end catering staff in the tents behind us were quietly preparing to cut the open bar and pack up the food the exact moment the ceremony concluded, and the venue management realized the final payment had bounced. The perfect, luxurious wedding was proceeding exactly on schedule, completely oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath the altar had already collapsed. I kept my eyes locked on the bride and groom, maintaining my icy, serene smile, patiently waiting for the exact moment the violent reality of their destruction would finally breach the high walls of this extravagant garden. If anyone present knows any reason why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. The garden fell into a thick, expectant silence. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak trees. I did not raise my hand. I did not utter a single word. I simply kept my eyes locked on Chad's sweating face and let the universe deliver my objection. It started as a faint, high-pitched whine in the distance. Within seconds, the noise amplified into a deafening, aggressive chorus of blaring sirens. The serene atmosphere of the botanical estate shattered instantly. The heavy wrought iron gates at the entrance of the garden did not just open, they were violently thrown apart, slamming against the stone pillars with a resounding crash. If a camera were filming this, the smooth cinematic stabilization would completely vanish. The perspective would instantly switch to a frantic, handheld documentary style, shaking and jerking as it captured the sudden, absolute chaos. The pristine illusion of the billionaire wedding was violently ripped apart as over a dozen federal agents swarmed the pristine white carpet. They wore dark, heavy tactical windbreakers with stark yellow lettering printed across the back, FBI and SEC. Guests shrieked in horror. Panic erupted through the rows of pastel gowns and tailored suits. Wealthy socialites scrambled backward, knocking over gilded chairs and shattering crystal champagne flutes against the stone pavement. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing, resulting in a harsh, discordant screech of a bow dragging across a cello string. The lead agent did not hesitate. He marched straight down the center aisle, his heavy boots trampling the scattered white rose petals moving with terrifying, undeniable authority. He bypassed the terrified guests and stepped directly up to the floral altar. Chadwick Montgomery, the agent, barked, his voice echoing over the manicured hedges and completely drowning out the whimpers of the bridal party. You are under arrest for massive federal wire fraud, aggressive intellectual property theft, and the orchestration of an unlicensed multi-state Ponzi scheme. The last drop of color drained from Chad's face. He looked like a corpse standing upright. The smug, untouchable armor he had worn his entire life dissolved into pure, unfiltered terror. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He dropped Nia's hands as if her skin had suddenly caught fire, stumbling backward and crashing into a pillar of imported orchids. "This is a mistake," Chad finally stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "You have the wrong person. My father will handle this. Call my lawyers." He frantically looked toward the front row for his parents, expecting the shield of generational wealth to protect him. But the handheld camera perspective would catch his father vigorously backing away from the altar. The older man was already pulling a burner phone from his pocket, his face pale, actively distancing himself from his own son to protect whatever offshore assets he had left. There would be no rescue. The agent grabbed Chad by the shoulders, spinning him around with brutal efficiency. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs echoing across the altar was the loudest sound in the garden. Nia stood frozen in her $20,000 dress, entirely unable to comprehend the nightmare unfolding in front of her. Her perfect manufactured reality was being dismantled live in front of the city's most elite gossips. She clutched the heavy silk fabric of her gown, her chest heaving as she let out a piercing, hysterical scream. She begged the agents to stop screaming that this was her wedding day, demanding that someone fix the mistake. No one even looked at her. She was entirely irrelevant to the federal takedown. But the physical arrest of the groom was only the first phase of the slaughter. The secondary shockwave hit exactly 3 seconds later. All across the front row, cell phones began to vibrate and chime in a chaotic, unsynchronized symphony of disaster. It started with Chad's investors, the venture capitalists who had poured millions into his vaporware company. They were pulling their phones from their pockets, their faces twisting in horror as they read the emergency alerts from their wealth managers. Their funds were frozen. Their investments had vanished into a seized federal holding account. Then it hit my parents. Marcus was standing near the aisle, his hands trembling violently as his phone emitted a harsh, continuous emergency tone. He fumbled to unlock the screen, his breathing becoming shallow and erratic. I watched from my seat, perfectly still, as his eyes scanned the automated email from his primary lending bank. The text on his screen was a death sentence. The massive wire transfer he had authorized to Chad's firm had been flagged, seized, and permanently locked within a federal investigation holding pattern. Because those funds were directly tied to the second mortgage on our family estate, the bank had instantly recognized the catastrophic risk. The margin call had been triggered. The notification explicitly stated that immediate foreclosure protocols were being initiated. Valerie leaned over his shoulder, her eyes darting across the glowing screen. A guttural, agonizing sob ripped from her throat. She dropped her designer clutch, the expensive bag hitting the grass with a dull thud. "Marcus," she gasped, digging her manicured fingers into his suit jacket. "Marcus, what does that mean? What about the retirement accounts? Check the brokerage app. Check the retirement funds." My father's hands were shaking so severely he could barely tap the screen. He opened his financial portfolio application. The loading circle spun for 2 agonizing seconds before revealing the dashboard. The balance was 0. In his absolute desperation to secure a seat at the billionaire's table, my father had not just mortgaged the house. He had quietly liquidated every single asset, every mutual fund, and every last cent of their retirement savings, pouring it all into Chad's fraudulent holding company to maximize his equity stake in Project Phoenix. It was all gone, wiped out by the very digital trap I had coded the night before. They were completely, irrevocably bankrupt. My father's knees buckled. He collapsed heavily into the wooden pew, clutching his chest as he hyperventilated. He looked around the garden, his eyes wide and glassy, watching the elite society he had worshipped actively turning their backs on him. The catering staff were already hauling cases of unserved champagne back to the delivery trucks. The venue managers were frantically shouting into their radios. Chad was being shoved into the back of an armored federal transport vehicle. Nia was sobbing on the ground, the pristine white train of her dress smeared with dirt and trampled rose petals. I did not move to help them. I did not offer a word of comfort. I simply sat in my chair, smoothing a microscopic wrinkle from the knee of my crimson suit. The chaotic shaking camera lens would finally steady as it locked onto my face. I watched my father gasp for air, realizing that his greed and his cruelty had ultimately cost him everything. He had thrown me to the wolves to protect his empire, never realizing I was the one commanding the pack. I stood up slowly, the movement smooth and unhurried amidst the absolute pandemonium. I adjusted my cuffs, gave the ruined altar one last indifferent glance, and turned my back on my family for the rest of my life. I had fully intended to walk away to let the federal agents and the bankruptcy courts handle the rest of their miserable existence. But as my heel pivoted on the cobblestone, a sound tore through the heavy, frantic air of the garden. "What did you do?" Nia's voice was a hysterical, jagged shriek that cut straight through the noise of the murmuring crowd and the blaring radios of the SEC agents. I paused. She scrambled towards me, entirely abandoning the poised, aristocratic grace she had practiced for months. Her $20,000 silk gown caught on the jagged edge of an overturned gilded chair, tearing with a loud, violent rip, but she did not even notice. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face. "You called them. You did this. You ruined my wedding." If the imaginary documentary camera had been tracking my departure, it would have instantly dropped low to the ground. The lens would focus tightly on the sharp, lethal point of my crimson Italian stilettos as I slowly, deliberately turned back around. The shot would smoothly track upward, gliding over the razor-sharp tailoring of my bespoke power suit, finally settling on my face. There was no fear. There was no hesitation. There was only a proud, icy, terrifying smile. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power never has to shout. I simply let the truth catch up to the lies. I replied, my tone dangerously calm. I raised my right hand, giving a single subtle snap of my fingers. From the shadowed archway of the vendor entrance, my lead asset manager, Vance, stepped into the brilliant morning sunlight. He was flanked by two of my top legal assistants. They moved with predatory efficiency, carrying thick, heavy leather briefcases. The remaining guests, the billionaires and socialites who had not yet fled the garden, parted instinctively to let them through. I motioned toward the ornate, floral-draped reception table that was meant to hold the guest book. Vance nodded. With a swift, practiced motion, the assistants unclasped the briefcases and tipped them forward. A massive, heavy cascade of legally bound documents, bank statements, and court filings spilled across the pristine white linen, the sound like a gavel striking wood. My father Marcus was still clutching his chest, his face a terrifying shade of gray, as his brain tried to process his newly minted bankruptcy. I walked directly up to him. I reached into the center of the scattered documents and pulled out a heavy leather-bound portfolio stamped with gold foil. I slammed it hard against his chest, forcing him to take it with shaking hands. "You pulled me into a service corridor yesterday," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the ruined altar. "You looked me in the eye and told me you were permanently cutting off my tuition to that generic community college program. You told me I was a useless burden." Marcus stared at the portfolio, his breath rattling in his throat. "Open it," I commanded. His trembling fingers fumbled with the leather flap. The document inside caught the sunlight. "It is a tragedy you cut off my funding yesterday," I continued, savoring every single syllable. "Especially considering I graduated valedictorian with a master's degree in computer science from MIT 6 months ago. That generic, worthless code you thought Chad was building for his revolutionary startup, I wrote it. I patented it. I own every single line of it. And I am the one who just handed the FBI the digital footprint proving he stole it from my servers." The collective gasp from the remaining crowd was intoxicating. Marcus's eyes bulged, darting from the prestigious diploma to my face. The daughter he had deemed a failure was the actual architect of the wealth he had just destroyed his life trying to steal. He opened his mouth, but only a pathetic wheezing sound emerged. I did not wait for him to find his words. I turned on my heel, my crimson suit flashing in the sun, and walked directly toward Chad. 2 federal agents were currently locking the heavy steel cuffs around his wrists, preparing to read him his rights. I held up a hand to the lead agent. He paused, recognizing my authority, and stepped back just enough to give me the floor. Chad looked up at me. The arrogant, untouchable golden boy was gone. His face was slick with sweat, his eyes wide and pleading like a cornered animal. "And you?" I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal whisper that carried perfectly in the sudden silence. "You stood in my parents' living room and bragged to my sister that you were going to buy this exact historic Buckhead estate. You promised it would be her wedding gift. You told my father it was a done deal secured by your vast imaginary fortune." I reached back. Vance stepped forward perfectly on cue, placing a crisp, notarized property deed directly into my outstretched hand. I held it up inches from Chad's terrified face. "Surprise?" I whispered. "I bought this entire estate. In cash. On Tuesday. You, your fake empire, and this entire fraudulent circus are currently trespassing on the failure's private property." Chad physically recoiled, his knees sagging against the grip of the federal agents. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head rapidly, as if he could wake up from the nightmare. The absolute crushing humiliation of being entirely outplayed by the woman he thought he was scamming finally broke him. I turned away from his pathetic display, my gaze sweeping the grass until I found my mother. Valerie was on her knees in the dirt, her expensive designer dress stained with mud and crushed petals. She was weeping hysterically, mourning the violent death of her social standing. I walked over and stood above her, casting a long, dark shadow over her trembling form. "Valerie," I said, stripping away the title of mother, "look at me." She looked up, her face a smeared, unrecognizable mask of expensive makeup and panic. "2 weeks ago, you cornered me in my apartment." I reminded her, my tone entirely devoid of sympathy. "You screamed at me. You demanded that I let you use my measly, pathetic student credit card to place the $10,000 deposit for these imported white roses. You said Chad's offshore accounts were temporarily tied up in a transfer, and you needed my limit to save face." She whimpered, nodding frantically, trying to find some shred of connection. "That charge did not go to a student account," I informed her, my voice turning to ice. "It was processed and aggressively financed through my primary asset management firm. I approved the loan at the absolute maximum market interest rate legally allowed by the state. The official writ of collection for the outstanding balance plus penalties will be hand-delivered to your doorstep by Monday morning." I leaned down slightly, making sure she heard every single word of my final strike. "Oh, wait, I forgot," I said, flashing a cold, hollow smile. "Marcus leveraged the house to buy into Chad's scam. The bank seized your collateral an hour ago. You do not have a home anymore to receive the mail." A ragged, breathless scream tore from Valerie's throat. She collapsed forward onto the grass, completely broken, her hands clutching at the dirt. Nia stood paralyzed near the altar, her mouth hanging open, entirely stripped of her arrogance, her groom, and her future. Marcus was still staring at the MIT diploma, trapped in a catatonic state of shock. The silence in the garden was absolute, save for the sound of my mother crying and the distant approaching wail of more police sirens. The wealthy guests, the people my family had bled themselves dry to impress, were staring at me in sheer, unadulterated awe. I was no longer the invisible, socially inept sister in the background. I was the undisputed queen of the board. I gave the federal agents a polite, brief nod. They hauled Chad away, dragging him roughly down the aisle he had just walked down as a king. I did not look back at my family again. I turned and walked slowly down the white carpet, my stilettos clicking sharply against the stone, walking away from the wreckage of their lives, and stepping out into the brilliant sunlit expanse of my own empire. I had not made it 10 steps down the rose-strewn aisle before I heard the frantic, desperate scrambling behind me. "Wait! Please wait!" My mother's voice broke into a shrill, breathless wail. She scrambled across the pristine white carpet, her ruined designer gown tangling around her knees. Marcus and Naya were right behind her. Their previous arrogance was completely obliterated, replaced by the primal, ugly panic of total financial ruin. Valerie lunged forward, her trembling hands wrapping desperately around the hem of my crimson blazer. "You cannot do this to us," she sobbed, her tears leaving dirty streaks across her carefully contoured cheeks. "We are your family. Blood is thicker than water. Family is everything. You have to save us. Please just let us stay in the house. You own it now. You cannot throw your own parents out onto the street." Marcus fell to his knees beside her, a broken, hyperventilating shell of a patriarch. "Just a bridge loan," he pleaded, his voice cracking with absolute desperation. "Just enough to cover the margin call. I will pay you back with interest. You are my daughter. You have to help me." Naya was weeping so hard she could not even speak, her hands clutching at the air as if trying to grab onto the billionaire lifestyle that had just evaporated before her eyes. I stood perfectly still, looking down at the people who had spent my entire life trying to erase me. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. The physical distance between us was about to rapidly expand, mirroring the permanent chasm I had just carved into our relationship. I reached down and gently but firmly pried Valerie's fingers off my bespoke suit. I smoothed the fabric back into sharp, pristine alignment. "You spent my entire life teaching me a very specific lesson," I said, my voice projecting calm, absolute authority over their whimpering. "You taught me to be ruthlessly practical. You taught me to only invest in assets that yield a high return, and to only surround myself with people who bring tangible value to the table. I am simply applying your exact business model. I do not invest in toxic liabilities, and I absolutely do not associate with federal criminals and their willing accomplices." I did not wait for their response. I turned my back on their hysterical sobbing and resumed my walk toward the heavy wrought iron gates of the botanical gardens. Beyond them, my sleek, matte black Aston Martin was idling, the valet holding the door open with profound respect. I slid into the driver's seat, the heavy leather and the quiet, powerful hum of the engine wrapping around me like an impenetrable shield. I pressed the button to roll up the tinted window. The thick glass glided upward smoothly, and completely cutting off the sound of my family screaming my name. I put the car in gear and accelerated down the cobblestone driveway. I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The figures of my parents and my sister grew smaller and smaller, fading into the background of a world they no longer possessed. They had confidently threatened to strip away my future, completely oblivious to the reality that I had already built an empire. It was an empire massive enough to buy their entire world in cash, just so I could have the pleasure of crushing their arrogance into dust.